Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the books that I have read in the first half of July. I am hoping that this is going to be a quick one because I have just been informed by my mother that she has put food in the oven for me and it's going to be 20 minutes. Can I do that? I've never been able to do a video in 20 minutes before, so we'll see. However, hopefully it should be doable because I've just got 4 books to talk about, and one of which I was wanting to do a more in-depth video on, so I'll only be discussing briefly. So fingers crossed, we'll see if I get this done. The first book, which as I've said I want to do justice for in a slightly longer video, is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. This is a book that I've seen so many glowing reviews for very recently, and of course Bernardine Evaristo is probably most well known for her book Girl, Woman, Other, which won the Booker Prize last year, which I have read, but I do have to say I actually think that I prefer this one. I absolutely adored this book. Mr. Loverman tells the story of Barrington Walker, who is 74 years old. He emigrated to Britain from Antigua with his wife Carmel when he was younger. They've been married for 50 years, but what Carmel does not know is that Barrington, or Barry as he is known to most of his friends, has been in a relationship with his best friend Morris since they were 14. And at the age of 74, Barry is preparing himself to have the hard conversation with Carmel to finally divorce her so that he can spend the remaining years of his life with his real love. However, of course, when you've been in a situation where you have been keeping such a massive secret to yourself and have been so stuck into a routine for so many years, this is really hard for Barry to do. And this book is really him coming to terms with his identity and also coming to terms with the changes that are going to happen to his family once he divorces Carmel. The book is mainly told through the point of view of Barrington, but we do also get some snippets into Carmel's life and her perspective on her marriage and her relationship with Barry as it unfurled through the decades. It is a very character-focused story. It is not very plot-heavy, but as we know, I love character-focused stories, so I absolutely gobbled this up. There are so many different interlinking themes throughout this book, not only just immigration and assimilation into a new country, but also education and language and different kinds of prejudices, both homophobia and racial discrimination. And all of these themes interlocked so well that when I've actually been trying to write out a bit of a script for how I want to do this review, I'm constantly coming back to, oh, this links to this and this links to this. I just think the way that Bernardine Evaristo crafted this novel was just so well done. You really do believe that you are glimpsing into these people's lives. They feel so fully formed, well-rounded characters. And what you'll hear from a lot of people is that this book is incredibly funny. Barrington is just such a hilarious character to spend time with. I think if I had read this in June, then Barrington would probably have been my favourite character of the year. I just adored his perspective. Though he's not a perfect character, he does have a lot of prejudices himself. He says a lot of things that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily agree with, but you also know that a lot of the things that he says is because he's got a lot of prejudices born of years and years of denying himself his true identity and internalizing a lot of homophobia, a lot of sexism, a lot of racism, you know, and this all filters through into his thoughts. Like I say, I think it's fantastic. I want to do justice for it in a longer form review, so expect that. It's coming soon. Hopefully sooner than the Coriolanus video that I said I was going to do, but honestly, I think that's just a case of I don't know how qualified I am to talk about Shakespeare in any sort of way, but I do want to do that video at some point, so we'll see. We'll see how we go. The very first book that I actually read in July, which I absolutely loved and adored, it is 5 stars. Like Mr. Loverman, it would probably have gone on to my best books of 2020 so far, had it been June that I read it, is Matilda, Empress, Queen, Warrior by Catherine Hanley. This tells the story of Empress Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry II and who was meant to succeed to the throne after her brother William died in the White Ship disaster. However, if you've ever looked at a list of British monarchs, you'll notice that Matilda is not in that list. Why is that, you ask? Why do we not have a Queen Matilda on our list of monarchs? Because it got stolen from her. So begins my frustration with this entire story. Like I say, I loved this book, but I was so frustrated throughout all of it. Just everything that happened to Matilda in her life just frustrated me so much, and I had so much empathy and sympathy for her and what she was going through. So first off, in Matilda's life, she gets married off. She gets sent away at the age of 8 to marry a man who is like 16 years older than her, you know, as you do, as is common practice. She marries him at the age of 12, which no me gusta, no me gusta. And you know, actually they have a pretty good relationship, and her husband Henry V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, he really respected her and he really taught her how to rule a kingdom. So from quite a young age, Empress Matilda demonstrated that she was a very competent ruler. And unfortunately she does become a widow in her early 20s, so she goes on home, she's living it up, having like a great young widowhood. But unfortunately, as said before, her brother William dies in the White Ship disaster, which definitely look up because it's a whole mess. Basically, a bunch of young nobles and royals went on this ship, departing, you know, from France to England. They hit a rock and it all goes down. Basically, one person survived. Like a good chunk of the royal succession to the throne of England went down in that ship. It was not good. So Matilda's father, Henry I of England, is left with a conundrum. Who's going to succeed the throne? Because he doesn't have any more sons. Any more legitimate sons, I should say. And he has this long, drawn-out thought process of, I don't know, who could possibly rule the throne? I just don't have any more children. Oh, wait, I have a daughter. Huh. Let's see how that works out. So Henry gets all of his nobles together and he says, listen guys, I know it's not been done before, but I'm not likely to have any sons. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to get married to this other lady and we'll try and have some sons. But if I don't have sons by the time that I die, this is my daughter Matilda. I'm sure she'll be a great queen. She's very competent. You know, she's helped rule a country before. I want her to be the queen. And all of the nobles were like, yeah, Henry, totally. We will definitely support Matilda's claim to the throne. We will definitely support her. You can see where this is going, can't you? So like I say, Matilda is living it up as a young widow. She is first in line to succeed her father, but they all turn round to her and they say, listen, Matilda, I understand that you're having a great time, you know, being a single woman, you know, being a rich widow who doesn't have to be accountable to any man, but we need you to have some sons. So we are going to marry you off to this 14-year-old boy, 11 years younger than you, so that you can have a few babies, so you can have an heir and a spare. Is that all right? And she's like, no, I'd rather not actually. And they're like, go on, you have to secure a line of succession for your father and for your own line. And she's like, oh, fine, I don't want to, but fine. If that's what it's gonna take for me to have the throne, fine, I will go have some sons with this guy. Predictably, a 25-year-old woman marrying a 14-year-old boy, they don't get on. It's not a good match. So she separates from him for a little bit, but they keep pushing her. Matilda, you have to have some sons. You have to go back to your husband that you absolutely despise and have some sons. So she's like, fine. I will go back to this man that I absolutely abhor, this little man-child. Fine. So she goes back, she has an heir and a spare, she has 2 boys, she's pregnant with her 3rd, when what happens? Her father dies. So you're thinking, yay, great, Matilda is now queen, she can go off to England. Unfortunately, she is in France and she is pregnant, which is a very difficult journey to do when you're not pregnant. So she has to be confined. What goes on? What happens? Oh yeah, some randomer called Stephen decides, hey, I'm gonna be king instead. So he swoops in and claims the throne. Now you might be thinking, did he have a claim? And I'm going to argue, no, he did not. Technically, yes, definitely in the line of succession, he was nephew to Henry II, but even saying that he was, you know, a legitimately born relation, he was the 3rd child. He had 2 older brothers. Even if we are going by male primogeniture, he had 2 older brothers that should have inherited first. I'm so annoyed. It frustrates you because Stephen basically got the throne in a game of Bagsy. He literally was the first one there and he claimed the throne. And you know, all of the nobles make this big grand claim that, oh, we didn't really want to have Matilda as queen, we were only pretending. Like, no, this is not true. They swore this oath twice. There is no ambiguity over whether or not Matilda should have been queen. Like, I'm so frustrated, can you tell? So this led to a period in English history that is called the Anarchy, where there was the fight between Matilda and Stephen as to who should be ruler. And honestly, like, why is this not being made a movie yet? I feel like this could be a fantastic film. There is so much drama that goes on, and I don't even want to spoil like these bits of history for you because I want people to read this. This reads so well and so entertainingly. Throughout the entire biography, you're just kind of left with this feeling of, men suck. Obviously, hashtag not all men, but when I say not all men, I am primarily referring to David, King of Scots, who is a gem throughout. David, King of Scots, was Matilda's uncle, and he, like, right from the get-go was so supportive of her and was always by her side, and it's just like, yeah, love him. As we had with the Eleanor of Aquitaine biography, you've got the issue of there being a big lack of evidence for a lot of this period. But what you also find with Matilda is that a lot of chronicles that do exist and do mention Matilda speak about her in very, very gendered terms. She's basically criticised by these chroniclers repeatedly for being too bossy, too arrogant, too full of herself in her claim to be the ruler. But it's often for things that, you know, say her father or Stephen or her son later, Henry II, were praised for. You even have another Matilda who is the wife of Stephen, who goes on and really fights and campaigns for Stephen, and she is praised for like shedding her femininity and being a strong woman, whereas at the same time, in the same breath, Matilda is being criticised for the same thing, for fighting for her own rights to the throne. And it basically boils down to they don't like Matilda because she is fighting for the throne for herself, not for a man. Hi everybody, I was just editing the video and I realised that I didn't even touch upon the thing that annoyed me the most about Matilda's life. Apologies, I have been on a walk, I've had my sunglasses on, so we've got these very attractive little sunglasses print on my nose. So the thing in Matilda's life that frustrates me even more than everything that had already happened, I forgot to mention, is that when she dies, her son, who ends up being Henry II, so yeah, technically she did eventually win overall. She didn't get the throne, but her son at least did. But when she dies, Henry II commissions this epitaph to go onto her tomb, to be inscribed onto her tomb, and it reads, "Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lives the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry." Not only did they not even have the decency to name her, to put Matilda on her tomb, but they basically said the only reason that she was any good was because of her father, because of her husband, and because of her son. I'm so annoyed. And yeah, I absolutely loved reading this. As I've said before, I'm not really a medieval historian. I'm much more comfortable in early modern history, particularly the Tudors and the Georgians. We don't mention the Stuarts. But yeah, I absolutely loved reading about this life of Empress Matilda. She has become one of my new favourite historical figures. So I know that this is not necessarily going to be for everybody, but I really highly recommend it. It is really good fun to read. And I really want to see the film or TV adaptation of this life because I think it could be so, so fun. And then the next two books I'm kind of going to talk about together because I kind of think about them together, and it is Tudor Fashion by Hilary Lynn, and then Dress in the Age of Jane Austen, which is all about Regency fashion, and this is by Hilary Davidson. Two books that I was really, really hyping up in my head and really was desperate to read, and I loved them both. Fashion and dress history is something that I have been increasingly getting more and more into because I've always just been so fascinated by historical dress. I don't make clothes myself, I am not like a reenactor, but I love the fashions of historical time periods, so I wanted to learn more about it, and this was kind of like my gateway into it. And what you get when you read these books is the extent to which dress and fashion history has really been neglected by traditional scholarship. People don't put as much emphasis and importance into dress history, which is just kind of baffling to me because there is so much that is tied up into the clothes that people wore. Not only is it about like material culture and what was available, but also you have so much in terms of like international relationships, class divisions, insight into how the economy is doing, the day-to-day routines of different people. Fashion is really tied up into everything because people live their lives in these garments. I always think of a line in the classic film The Devil Wears Prada where Stanley Tucci's character Nigel is talking about how these fashion designers made something that was greater than art because you live your life in it. It's not just something that you stare at, you spend your entire life in these clothes. In so many ways, the clothes that people wore have so much to say and to offer about people's day-to-day lives and just generally about history than, you know, like focusing on a battle or focusing on one solo political event. As I've said before, I do love an illustration and photo heavy book, and both of these books provide that in bucket loads. So from Tudor Fashion, I'm just going to show you some favourites. Got Henry, got the rainbow portrait of Elizabeth, this painting of the Field of the Cloth of Gold, which they liked so much they included it twice in this book. The embroidery is gorgeous. I've got the Bristow hat, which is one of the only pieces that we think might have survived that may possibly have belonged to Henry VIII. This one, and just, yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And then the same thing in my Regency fashion book, you have got different cartoonists, paintings, images of actual clothing that survived, because of course for Regency period we've got a lot more surviving clothing. We've also got a lot more like print and like cartoons and the actual account books of the different clothes that people bought in their lives. And oh yeah, I loved reading these. I think the commentary in Tudor fashion that really stood out to me was the way in which insecurity really fueled Tudor dress, especially for the monarchs. You've got Henry VII, whose fashion is very much influenced by the monarchs who came before him, because he's really trying to promote the idea that his claim is legitimate, that he is just a continuation of what has come before. Henry VIII, on the other hand, really wants to demonstrate his power and his wealth, so he really shakes things up in terms of fashion and really changes up the silhouette. So suddenly you've got these really big torsos and big shoulders that you see emerging, which is also a bit of a theme with his son Edward. And then Mary, you have more of her relationship with her husband coming through, because she dresses in a much more traditional Spanish way to fit in with her husband Philip. And then with Elizabeth, she's really trying to maximize this idea of female power, so suddenly the silhouette of women's fashion becomes so much more bigger, so much more extravagant, whereas the men in her court the fashion starts to recede in. They become a lot smaller than they were in Henry VIII's day. And then the main thing that comes through with the Regency fashion is the effect of the French Revolution on silhouettes and styles. The obvious example is the shift in dress silhouette, but one specific example that really stood out to me was the emphasis on boots. Prior to the French Revolution, boots were not seen as being a very fashionable item. They were seen as being alien to gentility. However, after the French Revolution and after the Napoleonic Wars especially, boots were much more of a staple in male fashion and something that you could just wear out and about in town, whereas before it was like, oh, what are you wearing those for? So yes, really enjoyed these, really loved them. I'd say the Regency dress book is much more comprehensive. It is a much more academic study of clothing and fashion history, whereas Tudor fashion, I think, is actually quite accessible. It's much more of an introduction, I would say. But I think whichever of these you do latch onto will probably be more to do with your area of interest. You know, I'd probably say if I had to pick between Tudor and Georgian, then I am much more of a fan of Tudor, so I think I really latched onto this. But then this is stunning too. I love both of them. I am glad to have both of these books in my collection now. So yes, that is everything that I have read so far in the month of July. I feel like there is less here than in normal months, but I think that's partially because I have been reading Middlemarch by George Eliot for the Middlemarch along that's being hosted by Claire Fenby. I'm also getting down to the last few books on my TBR, and I always feel like when I get to these like 5 or 6 books, my reading pace always slows down. I don't know why, because I'm sure I'm going to enjoy these books, but they've just been there for so long. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I will get to a few of those in the second half of this month. Do let me know what you've been reading recently. I'd love to hear from you and what you thought of any of these books if you have picked them up yourself. I love talking to you. It's been very fun, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.